How did you get involved with chiasmus?
The woman who was sort of the leader of that, Lydia Yuknovich,
Right.
David Shields knew her, and he said, you might want to send them something. So I did, and like a year later, she contacted me and said, is that collection still available?
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have like personal relationships with her?
We've gotten to know each other because she's in Portland and she comes up here, and she came and visited a class of mine a few years ago, and we're at a conference together in Paris a year and a half ago. So we keep in touch and see each other occasionally. Her memoir, her fiction is great, but that memoir is just so fabulous.
The chronology.
Chronology of Water, yeah.
I want to
really
read
fabulous.
Dora, but I haven't yet.
Yeah, that one's fun. It's really different.
It's a novel, though.
It's a novel, yeah.
What is the advice that you give to young writers generally?
Oh, a variety of advice. The most important advice is to develop a sense of inner reward so that you're writing stuff that you find interesting, you are passionate about, you care deeply about. You're not thinking about, oh, if I write this, then so-and-so might publish it, or if I write this, people will be able to relate to the character. That is not ever your concern. Because the external rewards for 99% of writers are few and far between. I'm not saying we don't like them or that we don't need them, but you cannot survive on them. And I don't mean that like literally in terms of money, which is also true. Emotionally, you cannot survive on the external rewards. They are just too few and far between. You really need to be able to develop self-motivation, self-criticism, and persistence. Those are the most important things if you're going to keep writing. So that's one set of bits of advice. The other bit of advice is to, be pretty hard on yourself. Really, when you feel something's done, really ask yourself, is this as done as it can really be? And to read, of course, constantly, and to also not be afraid to put a book down, which is something I didn't do until about 5 years ago. If I started reading something, I felt compelled to finish it, but now it's like life is way too short for that. And then in terms of working, I really think having some sort of day job, you're going to need a day job that you can do for the minimal amount of hours that is good for you. So some people are like, oh, I don't care if I have health insurance, or I don't care if I have a car, and I'll live in my friend's basement, and all that's fine. And then, maybe they need to work 10 hours a week, right? But other people are like, I just need health insurance because either I really need it or I'm just one of those people who doesn't want to take that risk. So I always recommend that. Rather than, let's say, finishing graduate school and deciding I have to have a teaching job. The only thing I can imagine doing is teaching one class at 4 different community colleges. I wouldn't recommend that.
There's the sense of validation coming with teaching, which in terms of our literary community, or the way that we look at writers, is if you're a professional creative writer, you need to be teaching, or who knows what you're doing, like an attitude perhaps.
Well, teaching is the best day job I've ever had, and it is a great job if you can have a full-time job at a 4-year school and you aren't teaching 4 courses a term, right? It is great. Because you get to spend all day reading and writing and talking to other people who are interested in the same thing you are. And, if you can afford it, you get the summers off. And there is no question that it is fabulous. But for some people, a full-time job at a community college where they are teaching 4 classes a quarter is also a great job because they love the teaching. And over the years, they figure out a way to do it where it is not, a 300-hour-a-week job. But the people who go out and think, I just have to have any teaching job when they're just beginning, that doesn't make sense to me because you're not going to get paid that much. You're driving around from one part-time gig to another. You have no time to write. The only thing that's going to get you the eventual teaching job that you really want is publication. Yes, some teaching experience also. So maybe you do the community college teaching gig for a little while. But that teaching gig is not going to get you the eventual teaching job that you really want. So if you're doing that and it means that you're not doing any writing, that is useless.
if you don't have a whole lot of teaching experience, but you do have good publications, it might not be hard to get a teaching job.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they're all hard to get. So you need some teaching experience. It's possible that you could get an interview and that you could teach a model class and that you could get a teaching job. But there have to be something in your packet that illustrates that you can potentially be a really good teacher. Or at least a teacher that is not going to be dragging down the rest of the faculty. Because, when we hire, we're like, we want really great writers, of course, and we would never hire someone for a full-time job if they didn't have at least one book. It just wouldn't even happen. They wouldn't even get on the short list. But once you have your, 40 people with books, what do you start thinking about? You start thinking about how are they going to contribute to be selfish to my working life? Is this someone who, graduate students are going to want to work with and will be a good working partner for me? Or is this going to be someone who doesn't pay any attention to the students and they all still want to work with the rest of us? Is this going to be the sort of person where when they teach the 300 level class and I get those students at the 400 level, they're prepared?
Are you all actually obligated to have a certain number of things published per year?
No. So when you get hired as an assistant professor, let's say it's a tenure track position, you have really 6 years and then you come up for tenure. So it depends on the sort of school where you're teaching. Like UW is a Research 1 university, which means that everyone who comes up for tenure has to succeed at the research part of their job, which for a creative writer is writing. And that is almost, so far, has been interpreted as the book or an equivalent. Because when I got tenure, all those stories had been published, but not in book form. I did not have the book contract yet. But that was very unusual, and that, I think, a lot of help from my colleagues to make that happen. So usually you're expected to have a book at that point. And then in order to move from associate professor to full professor, you really need to have at least one more book. And that book, and some evidence of international reputation. Good reviews, something overseas, translations, I don't know. But no one says, every year you have to have published X number of stories. As a matter of fact, they don't do that at all. When you do get given money for a raise, the department goes through you review the people below you in rank. And in this department and here, the money is so small that basically we just say everyone gets merit. Divide it up equally because it's such a small pot of money. Sometimes there are years when there is no money. Let's say after 4 years, this just happened with the recession. We had no raise for 4 years, so we just got a raise. So at that point, they're going to look at that whole stretch of time. They're not just going to say, well, in the past 12 months, you haven't published anything. So we had a little extra money this year, but you're not going to get any. No, they're going to look at the past 4 or 5 years and see how productive you've been.
Do you have an international relationship with other?
So a little bit. There's a study group in Paris called ODELA, which I can't remember what it stands for, but it was started maybe in the 1970s. It's a group of French scholars who study contemporary American fiction mostly, some poetry. And they focus on experimental work. That's what they're interested in. So they meet every couple of months, and they usually invite an American writer to come and do a presentation there and have a discussion. So a couple years ago, I got to go to one of those, which was fabulous. And there's a woman there, she's actually Romanian by birth, but she has lived in France for years and years, who writes on my work. So I have a scholar writing on my work. And then that group, ODELA, combined with an American group, not this past June, the year ago June, and they put on a conference there, so I got to go and present a reading and a paper. Yeah, a reading and a paper there. And it's a seminar. It's an ongoing seminar is really what it is.
Do you have translations up?
No.
Oh, great. Should we call it done? Finished?
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me.
Yeah, no problem.
Again, this is Maya Sonenberg at UW, interviewing with Rachael Armstrong for Pacifica Literary Review. Thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you.